Ohio State, Wisconsin get together on Saturday night at the Shoe, one of the premier series in the Big Ten in recent decades. And, of course, the Big Ten opener for both teams. We've got Michael Hogan on the line from Badger 247 to help us break it all down. Michael, how you doing today?
Great, Mark. Thanks for having me on.
Of course. Let's talk some Wisconsin football. And before we get to an offensive and defensive breakdown overall, let's look at the Washington State game, because obviously that's the one that everyone points to get a gauge on how good any particular team is at this point, only 3 weeks into the season. Okay, did they play a Power 5 team? How did they do? I saw a stat in the Big Ten Network the other day that this was the first time in 79 games. So the Badgers were 78-0 when gaining over 400 yards and giving up less than 300 yards. However, in this one, 401 to 253, despite the advantage in yardage, some mistakes in the red zone, some other issues, 3 turnovers that Wisconsin obviously upset at home against Washington State. Just your take on that game and the performance.
Yeah, it was a really weird game because it did feel like Wisconsin pretty much controlled it, on both sides. They played well enough to win on offense and defense, but you look at the penalties right away, 11 for 106 yards. I mean, you can't win many games against. I mean, you could probably get away with it against Illinois State, New Mexico State, 2 of the worst teams you play all year. But when you play a respectable Pac-12 opponent, you're going to get burnt a little bit, and that's pretty much what happened. That's at least my take on it. I think it was more the Badgers beating themselves than anything in that game. I mean, they had, the offensive line committed 5 of those penalties for almost 60 yards. I think like 4 or 5 or maybe even 6 of the total penalties wiped out like significant yardage gains for first down. So those right away, that you can look at that and say that's pretty much where you lost the game right there. But then there were some other mistakes, 2 special teams. They missed 2 field goals. Vito Calvaruso, transfer from Arkansas, has a great leg. We saw him kick a couple times, in the practices we got to watch in the spring and in the preseason training camp. He looked pretty good. But then just totally shanked 2 of them, not even close. He's dealing with an injury, so that might have played a factor in that there. And then, like you said, the 3 turnovers, one of them came out an interception. Cornerback Jay Shaw picked off a pass in the third quarter near the 50-yard line, and then the Washington State receiver comes back and strips him. So it was just a weird game full of just odd mistakes. And then they had another fumble after another. So in the fourth quarter, Graham Mertz, the offense drive down the field. Mertz throws an interception, and then Washington State fumbles trying to run back the other way. Wisconsin recovers. And then 2 plays later, Mertz fires over the middle to tight end Clay Cundiff. Has a lot of room to run, probably would have scored or at least just, gotten inside the 5 or the 10-yard line. And then he fumbles, and that's, Washington State runs out the last, 4 or 5 minutes. So it was just a really weird game. I don't know how much stock I'm really putting into it, just considering a lot of those mistakes are fixable, and they obviously had kind of a get-right game against New Mexico State this past week, and now they're on to the Buckeyes. Obviously, their most challenging test of the year on the road against one of the best teams in the nation.
When I think Ohio State, Wisconsin, I certainly think of a lot of important games in recent times in the Big Ten. The premier program, I may offend a few Iowa fans and others, the premier program in the Big Ten West. I know that Northwestern's won 2 of the last 4 championships, but I get it. Over the long haul, Wisconsin's been the best program in the division. Ohio State, the very best in the conference for at least 20 years. And I think of Wisconsin being a thorn in Ohio State's side, but at the same time, they've matched up quite a bit. I believe 7 consecutive meetings in Ohio State's win columns since a 20-10 Ohio State team that was number 1 in the country going to Wisconsin, getting upset in that affair. And of course, 3 Big Ten championship games that Ohio State has taken care of business. These matchups seem to be a situation where if Wisconsin can control their portion of the game, not control the game, but keep control of the game in regards to their style of play, keep Ohio State contained, then it turns into this just tremendous battle of one style of play versus the other, and it's become an epic type battle. That happens about half the time. The other half of the time, Wisconsin makes a couple mistakes. They've obviously got a smaller margin of error. Ohio State speed and athleticism takes over, and the result is 59-0 or 27 consecutive points in the second half to win the Big Ten championship game. That kind of runaway for Ohio State. So if there is a consistent program in the country where you know what you're going to get, it's Wisconsin. Is this team similar to previous editions? Because it certainly seems that way from the outside.
Yeah, I mean, obviously you have the offensive line, you have the rushing attack with Braylon Allen and a couple other guys, Ches Malusi, Isaac Garendo. The defense, maybe isn't as dominant as it was last year thus far, but they're solid. They're that in that top 10 range. They'll probably be in the top 5 by the end of the year, as they usually are, under Jim Leonard. But this year, I think their passing game is a little bit better than maybe what people have realized thus far. They brought in they made some changes in the offseason. They brought in Bobby Ingram from the Baltimore Ravens, who was a tight ends coach there, and receivers coach at one point. And then they hired him in January, and that was a big question all offseason. What would they do to improve the passing game, and specifically, even more importantly, would Graham Mertz, the highest rated recruit quarterback commit in program history, how much would he improve after throwing 11 interceptions and 10 touchdowns last year? And so far, albeit against weaker competition, aside from a Washington State team that is pretty good, I'll give them some credit. Even though, like I said, the Badgers kind of beat themselves there, but Mertz has looked pretty good. He's been impressive. He's completed about 72% of his passes. He's thrown 2 interceptions, neither of which have really been his fault. He has 6 touchdown passes, and he just is making better decisions. He has better accuracy, especially on the deep throws. Last year, he was only 11 of 41 on passes that traveled at least 20 yards down the field. This year, he's 9 of 11 thus far. Obviously, a smaller sample size through 3 games, but that's pretty encouraging. And he's got some talented wide receivers. They lost their top 3 pass catchers from a year ago to the NFL. And all offseason, Wisconsin fans heard of, this talented group of receivers, and nobody really, I guess some people didn't really buy it, but, in the practices we watched, we saw it firsthand, how talented those guys could be. And there's been some early returns there with Chimere DK and Skylar Bell. Marcus Allen at UCLA transfer Keontae Lewis is a bigger receiver. He's made some big catches for him so far this year. And at tight end, they lost Jake Ferguson, who was steady for him for 4 years. And Clay Cundiff has been very, very solid there so far this year. So I think, yeah, you see the same Wisconsin team. You know what you're getting, a big physical team. They want to run the ball. They're not going to go away from that, but I think their passing game is better this year, and maybe can open up some more things for them in a matchup like this against the Buckeyes, where they're going to need to put up some points.
Yeah, I don't know that anyone would question Graham Mertz's physical skills. He was rated where he was rated as a 5-star coming out of high school. That hasn't diminished. The evaluation of his physical skills were accurate. I remember him making a pass, I think it was early second half, late first half against Michigan at Camp Randall last season, where they might have been down by a touchdown, and he just threw a rope.
Yeah.
And I thought, well, this is the guy. I've seen him before. It's not like I was shocked, but I just thought, man, if he could lock in the decision-making and everything, put it together, certainly the arm talent is first rate. So he's obviously on a big stage. I know that Jerry Kill and Paul Chris were very complimentary of his performance last week in that blowout win. We got Michael Hogan on the line from Badger 247 Sports talking up Wisconsin. Of course, Badgers and Buckeyes get together, a primetime affair at the Shoe in Columbus. Braylon Allen, he's getting a little bit more help. Ches Malusi's healthy. Of course, that opened the door for Braylon Allen last year, and then he just was remarkable the final 9 or 10 games of the season. But it seems like he's got a little bit, again, with Malusi healthy and with a third back there, a little bit more help this year.
Yeah, I think that's huge. Last year, obviously Allen had to take over a pretty large load after Malusi went down with his injury. And at that point, when Malusi suffered the torn ACL, Isaac Garendo was already out with a foot injury. He'd been out for the year. He suffered that injury in October. So Allen was pretty much their only really option there. They had some other guys they were kind of working in on occasion, but he was taking 25, 30 carries a game there, the final stretch of the year. And, as a true freshman, and people got to keep in mind too, there's an adjustment of taking care of your body and figuring out how to stay fresh and healthy throughout the year. And this was a 17-year-old kid who had played spring football before reclassifying to show up early. So that was a lot. That was a lot. And he told reporters at the end of the year that his body was pretty banged up. And he didn't feel quite healthy, in that Minnesota game when he was held to about 50 or 60 something yards rushing. But yeah, this year they definitely have a lot more of a rotation. Allen's still the guy, obviously, but they can keep him fresh throughout the game with Malusi coming in, who's been really impressive. For a guy who's recovering from a torn ACL. He's just, even in the first couple of fall camp practices we watched, you just saw the burst and the speed. He looked a little bit better than he did last year, and that's saying something considering he was on pace for over 1,000 yards at the time of his injury. And Isaac Guerrero, I think, is a guy that they might try to get some more touches. He's easily the fastest guy on this team. He's returning kickoffs for him, but last week he got a lot more snaps as running back, and he's caught a couple passes too. And he can just be a game changer for him out of the backfield with that speed. But yeah, you're absolutely right. They're able to keep him fresh, and they have each guy kind of offers something a little different. Allen's a big bruising back. He has a lot of speed too. Maybe something that people don't really, give him credit for. And then Malusi, he's kind of a little bit of both. He's physical and he's really quick. And Guerendo's they're kind of scat back, I would say.
Got Michael Hogan on the line from Badger 247 Sports. Head on over there, check out Michael's work to get set for Wisconsin at Ohio State. Like the videos here, share the videos out on social media. Please subscribe to the Voice of College Football. When we look at the defense, you touched on the unit that Jim Leonhard is just rock solid, arguably the best in the business, and that the defense, maybe despite some elitists, Alabama camp, Georgia camp, Ohio State camp, where the recruiting rankings don't back up the performance on the field, it's obvious each and every year. Once Jim Leonhard gets all the pieces together, they develop guys if they need to for a year or two before they're ready. The end result is phenomenal at Wisconsin and churning out these top 5 to 10 defenses in the country. We know about Nick Herbig. Most college football fans do. Just give us an idea for people that are going to see Wisconsin for the first time on Saturday, who to look out for on that side of the ball.
Yeah, definitely keep your eyes on defensive tackle number 95, Keanu Benton. He's not a guy in this year. Maybe he's getting more pressure on the quarterback than usual, but he's usually just asked to take up blocks and do his job, let those linebackers come in and make plays. But he's fun to watch. This year he's gotten 10 or 11 pressures on the quarterback, couple hits. He's been really close on a couple sacks. I think he's definitely a player to keep an eye on. He's been around the program this is his 4th year. He's a senior. One of the emotional leaders of that group, along with Herbig. And then, obviously you got to watch the corners and safeties when you're going up against Ohio State and how those guys hold up. In the offseason, they revamped that secondary through the transfer portal, adding 4 guys, 3 cornerbacks. Jay Shaw, he came from UCLA. Justin Clark came from Toledo, and Cedric Dort came from Kentucky. And then they added a safety. Kamoye Latu came from Utah. I actually played high school football with Nick Herbig in Hawaii. So those guys are definitely guys to watch. In the slot, I'm going to be interested to see Smith and Jigba. He usually lines up in that slot position, very dangerous there. Dort and Clark, those are going to be matchups to watch. Those 2 guys against Smith and Jigba, and then Jay Shaw. You're looking at Marvin Harrison Jr. there on the outside. That's another matchup to watch. And then in the middle, obviously last year Jack Sanborn and Leo Chanel were 2 of probably the best, arguably the best, inside linebacker duos in the country. Georgia might have something to say about that there, but this year they have 2 new starters there, Mumana Jongmenta and Jordan Turner. Both guys, played some special teams the last couple years. Turner had 2 interceptions last year, and he only played like 24 defensive snaps. Those guys have played well so far, but I think you want to see a little bit more pressure and production out of them. considering what this defense asks of its linebackers. Herbig has 4 sacks. The rest of the team has 3. So they need more production out of the rest of the linebackers. And obviously they're hopeful that Benton can give them a little bit more too, even though that's really not, his role. He's got to get pressure in the quarterback, obviously, but that's not something. He only had 2.5 sacks last year. So I think I wrote about this last night too, that they're going to need more production, especially in a game like this. You got to get some pressure on Stroud. You look at what Michigan did to him last year. They had a great, defensive end in Hutchinson and Ajabo. It's going to be important for them to get some pressure in this game.
Michael, in a game of tremendous storylines and all sorts of different matchups we could break down, I'm going to give you 2 basic keys to the game and just get your thoughts on this. So number 1 would be, despite Ohio State's tremendous success on offense and the great talent, Ryan Day's been criticized at times as becoming too pass happy. And they really paid for that against the likes of Penn State and especially Michigan last year, not being able to move them out of the way in tough short yardage situations. They wanted to prove a point. They came out against Notre Dame, and in a game in which Notre Dame took away the pass, Smith and Jigba out of the lineup, Ohio State was able to ram it down their throats. So this is going to be really fascinating, playing into Wisconsin's hands to a certain extent. If Ohio State, they're going to do what they need to do. Obviously, they're going to look at Jim Leonard's defense and take what the defense gives them. But at the same time, I expect a more determined physical approach for Ohio State, and obviously Wisconsin's built to handle that.
Yeah, I looked at the numbers yesterday of the last, couple matchups, 3 matchups since 2017 when Leonard became defensive coordinator, and they've actually done a pretty good job taking the pass away. The only time Ohio State threw for more than 211 yards was in 2019 Big Ten championship game when Fields threw for almost 300 yards and 3 touchdowns. The other games, the first game that year, Fields threw for 167 yards. So they did a pretty good job against the pass. It's been the rushing attack that's really killed them in these matchups. J.K. Dobbins had a couple big games against them in 2019, and then back in 2017, J.T. Barrett. He ran for a touchdown. Ohio State ran for, over 200 some yards. They're averaging 252 or 253 yards against Wisconsin over these last 3 games against Leonard's defenses, with the 300-yard game coming in the first 2019 meeting. So I think that's going to be important, just considering what this offense has been able to do. I wouldn't be surprised if the Badgers just try to take away that rushing attack, because they do have, and I wrote about this too earlier this week, that everybody gives these attention to these receivers and the quarterback. They have really good running backs too, and Henderson and Mayan Williams. Henderson obviously has been dealing with an injury, and then Mayan Williams, he's leading them in rushing, with 200 some yards. But both those guys are capable of beating you. But it's like it's really complicated, like you said. You almost have to pick your poison. You focus too much on the run, and then they're going to beat you over the top. So, but I think that's going to be important. Like just considering the previous matchups and what they've been able to do, it's been the rushing attack that's really burned them at times, especially in the 2 recent meetings.
And then, Michael, on the other side of the ball, I don't know if there was any more attention given to a new coordinator on either side of the ball during the offseason than Jim Knowles at Ohio State. Is he going to fix the defense? He's got all these 4 and 5 stars to work with. Why can't they play defense? Because it's not been up to par the last 2 seasons. Good results against Notre Dame. Then we find out maybe the Irish aren't as good as we thought. And, of course, subpar competition the next 2 weeks, and actually Toledo hurt them in the pass game, also hurt them from the quarterback position in the run game. And I think many Ohio State fans and just general college football fans that are going to tune into this one would think that Wisconsin's ill-prepared to take advantage of what could still be an issue with Ohio State in the secondary, when you're telling me, and shoot, I knew it before we started this conversation from watching Wisconsin and looking at the numbers in the first 3 games, that this may be a pretty lethal Wisconsin passing attack, and that could come to a surprise to many.
Yeah, obviously, what I'm really interested to see is how much better Ohio State is. I mean, you hear about their defensive line. But you mentioned they haven't really been challenged too much yet, aside maybe for that Notre Dame game. But you look at last year when they played Michigan, they got beat pretty badly in the trenches in that game. Michigan had a huge rushing day, and they also hit some timely passing plays. I'm kind of looking for something similar here for Wisconsin. Can they? And obviously, it's different when you're on the road. You got to stay ahead of the chains. But can they kind of do something similar there to against a defense that has some question marks? Can they beat them up with those running backs, and then can Mertz make some timely throws down the field to those receivers who've done a great job of getting open and working in space so far this year? Like you said, maybe not something people are used to seeing from a Wisconsin team, but that's what I'm looking for. They're going to have to stay balanced. They can't go if they. You see this a lot with Wisconsin, especially last year when they pretty much just had to rely on the run. Teams would just load up the box, and they would just have to rely on their offensive line, just really having a good down, or else it'd just be a negative play. But I'm looking forward to seeing what Ohio State counters with. Do they respect the passing game right away, or do they kind of say, hey, we're gonna load up the box and sell out for the run? This is where we're going to learn a lot about Mertz and how much better he really is. Like I said at the beginning of the show, he's been better, against weaker competition. But this is where this game could really change the narrative for him after last year. After he took some heat for his poor decision making and interceptions and inconsistent play. This is where you can come out, even if they happen to lose and Mertz plays well. That would be a huge positive for Wisconsin, and it. They don't like to take moral victories, obviously, but that would be a pretty big positive if he plays well, either way.
Yeah, people should understand that if Wisconsin, regardless of the final score, but certainly if they play well, it's a Big Ten loss, but they've suffered a loss that previous, not in conference, so they still have all the division opponents lined up. The division is still very much in play, much like it is for Purdue, despite the bad look of 2 losses early. The Penn State loss is not good. It's a conference loss, but still, with all the division games between, what we would expect, I don't know if you agree, kind of a 4-team race. We'll see how it plays out, but not that Northwestern and Illinois on a particular weekend can't jump up. We know that.
Yeah.
But on a particular, do you see those 4 as being the main 4 in the Big Ten Western Division?
Yeah, I think that's a good point too. I mean, obviously any fan base is going to be deflated, after a loss. And if that happens this weekend, I'm sure it'll be the same up here in Madison. But yeah, if they lose this game, they still have everything in front of them in terms of winning the West. And I do agree that's kind of a 4-team race. You got Wisconsin, you got Iowa, Minnesota, and Purdue. Minnesota, I think so far you'd probably say it's been the most impressive team overall, but Purdue, like you said, a couple close losses. They probably should have won both those games. And Iowa, despite the massive questions they have on offense and just the poor performances they've had so far, they're always going to be a team that's going to, maybe play its best football toward the end of the year. But yeah, they're definitely it's kind of shaping up to be a 4-team race, even though I wouldn't be surprised if one of those teams at the bottom, Nebraska still kind of has a chance, I guess. So, but yeah, it's definitely a 4-team race in my eyes right now.
Yeah, those Iowa offensive woes are beyond woes. It's almost the unthinkable what they've been unable to produce here in the first 3 games of the season. We appreciate Michael's contribution. Michael, the conversation was great. Thank you so much for being here. I want everyone to check out Michael's work on Badger 247 Sports. He alluded to a number of his articles from earlier this week. So check out, do the deep dive, be an expert on Wisconsin football as they prepare for the Buckeyes and the matchup coming up Saturday. Michael, appreciate you stopping by.
Thanks for having me on.